policy advisor here at FEPS. Thank you all for showing up. Today is the launch of our report, The Dark Stores Back to the Dark Ages. We have several of the researchers today and a big panel of distinguished guests and experts. But before we start, I would like to ask Oliver Roethig, Regional Secretary of Unie Europa, to take the floor to open the session. Oliver?
Thank you very much. Hello to everyone, dear colleagues, ladies and gentlemen. First, a warning. Normally, I tend to play with a microphone, so if the quality is bad, my apologies. What happens in the commerce sector happens everywhere. The commerce sector is one of the biggest sector we have. Over 26 million workers of the EU will be under pressure. The quality of services is one of the key points of Unie Europa as a trade union movement. Is we want to have quality services for customers, but that also requires quality, the right to give quality services by the workers. So, coming back to retail and platforms. So then when companies like Glovo, Getir or Gorilla promise to bring groceries to your doorstep in less than 30 minutes, we should be careful. And I think that says even 10 minutes. So just think about this. When their CEOs promise new futures, bright destinies and retail revolutions, we should be alarmed. Rather than the promised land, the destination might well be a return to the dark ages, as we say in our report. And as an aside, I'm not really sure when we look at financial developments and financial markets that the business model of many of those companies is actually sustainable. We have seen what the platform economy does when it enters markets. Work is precarious, poorly paid and underinsured. Workers are driven to cut corners and put their health at risk, while their behavior is monitored to the minute. And I'm really happy there that the European Union is addressing this through the platform directive on algorithmic management part. Workers are not seen by platforms as humans, but as mere tools, disposable and replaceable. And workers trying to improve, trying to organize and to unionize face retaliation and dismissal. We have seen the impact of the platform economy in industries such as taxis, delivery and hotels. That's where it all started. And now it is knocking on the door of retail, of supermarkets, but at least we are warned and have some years ahead where we could see what had happened before. For these reasons, FEPS and Unie Europa commissioned a study into the rise of the so-called quick commerce or Q-commerce in Europe. Q-commerce, it's not cucumbers, it's actually Q-commerce. So Q-commerce. What it means for working conditions and what we can do about it is part of the study. The research is really timely, but also challenging. The sector is in full flux. During the study, companies grew, companies disappeared, went bust, or merged with others. Yet it's exactly now that we, unions and policymakers, as well as other stakeholders, can and need to shape the sector. We cannot wait until the new economy is a fait accompli. We cannot wait until the quality at work in the commerce sector is undermined. And we cannot wait until the quality of life in Europe for each and every one of us and our social model is under ever more pressure. Currently, it seems that most dark store workers have regular employment contracts. They are not freelancers, but most of them are actually platform workers. Most of them are different from other platform workers. That might seem in the first place as positive, but it is not enough. First of all, there's a Turkish example of Getir, and we have one of our colleagues here, so very welcome to Emirali. There it shows that the employment status is not guaranteed. There, in Turkey, Getir workers are mostly freelance workers, also those working for the dark stores. This practice also pushes other platform companies in Turkey to move from employment contracts to freelance contracts. We need a strong platform directive here in Europe to ensure the employment status is actually guaranteed for the future. Second, Unie Europa believes that there is a real difference when it comes to organizing and collective bargaining. Dark store companies need to engage in negotiations with unions, not interfere in organizing efforts, and respect sectoral collective agreements where they exist. There, I think it's also important that we actually work together. In Europe, we have social dialogue. 25 years ago, in another precarious sector, in property services, which is cleaning and private security, we came together with the employers to really make the first step at the European level to frame it so that we can guarantee quality jobs and fair conditions for everyone, which is also then good for competition in the sector. Our study today also shows that established retailers and large multinational companies are also investing in Q-commerce and rapid grocery delivery. We must not be blind by these challenges and lose sight of the fact that what happens in terms of platforms will have an impact on the commerce industry, and we want to make sure that this is actually not undermining what we have already in retailing, but keeping what we have, especially the good agreements. I'm very happy that FEPS and Uni Europa continues the good cooperation we had already for some years. Indeed, from 2015 to 2019, we pioneered research on platform workers with our project Digital Footprint Employment in Platform Economies across Europe. Our report today, Back to the Dark Ages, continues this line of research and brings it down to everyday practical level. There's work to do at many levels, and we're here today to discuss how we can best go about this job. So thank you very much to everyone for the contribution, and I'm looking forward to the good discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, Oliver. Let me, with no further ado, introduce to you the researchers that did the report. We have Rachel Verdin from the University of Sussex Business School. We have Wil Hunt, who will not speak but will be here to take questions from the Digital Futures at Work Center, Research Center at the University of Sussex. And also his colleague, Steve Rolf, also from the Digital Futures at Work Research Center, will speak together with Rachel. I think it's Steve who will start. Yes, so you will start. Professor Sasha Garben from the College of Europe, she wasn't able to make it, but she also contributed to the research, so it's good to mention that. Steve, the floor is yours.
Thanks very much. Can you hear me? Good. Do we have the slides? Good, brilliant. Well, thanks very much. It's it's an honor for us researchers to be published in this proud lineage of FEPS platform research that goes back several years, as Oliver mentioned. And it's great to have such a fantastic panel of speakers assembled here to discuss our research after this presentation. So in this report, we want to try to accomplish two things. We want to, first of all, try to examine the business processes which are underlying and which constitute this quick commerce sector that's grown up so dramatically in Europe and beyond over the past 3 years. And then we also want to look at the labor outcomes, what kind of impact this new platform retail work has on people who work in the sector. So how do we define quick commerce? Essentially, our understanding is that it represents the expansion or the extension of on-demand platform logistics into the grocery retail sector. That sounds like a mouthful, perhaps, but by on-demand platform logistics, we're thinking, there's clear analogies to services like Uber, for example. You don't generally schedule an Uber ride; you order it when you want it, and it turns up in relatively short order. The same for Deliveroo, for example's hot takeaway food model. So these are systems which enable you to order services on demand, and quick commerce just applies this model to the grocery sector. Often, the time commitments vary. They can be 10, 15, 30 minutes, but in relatively short order. How do these firms do it? Well, they use, the clear innovation, I think, of the Q-commerce sector is the use of dark stores or micro-fulfillment centers. So these are small warehouses dotted around a city which you or I generally can't enter, and they're there to be able to fulfill these orders at very rapid speeds. Rapid Grocery retail delivery is not entirely new. It's been around probably for 10 years or so in a very small scale operated by existing supermarkets. So we map this on this slide, and it's in the report too. Goods would just flow through the typical supply chain of a supermarket and then be picked up from a warehouse by an in-house supermarket delivery team and brought to your door. Often the time commitments on these arrangements were quite lax, something like 2 or 3 hours in many cases, and the services didn't take off all that strongly in most places. Slightly closer to the present day, what we saw was the entry of aggregator platforms into this model. So Uber, Deliveroo, for example, beginning to go into supermarkets, pick goods off the shelves, pack them for you, and then bring them to your door. This model kind of took off, I suppose, around 2017, 18, something like that. But again, not at very big scale. This was pretty marginal. Quick commerce startups pioneer this dark store model really at scale during the COVID pandemic. It's 2020, which is the crucial year for this relatively innovative business model that we see. And you can see from our diagram here, the quick commerce startups, Getir, Gorillas, others, bypass the existing supermarket retail supply chain more or less altogether. They set up their own relationships with suppliers and wholesalers. They build their own local and larger distribution centers, and they engage their own couriers, pickers, and so on in order to do this work. And it's this section of the supply chain that becomes really prominent under the COVID pandemic. Now, what can we say about quick commerce? I think since 2020, it's undoubtedly been a growth industry or a boom industry. Vast amounts of venture capital have flowed into this sector. I think we see Gorillas, for example, which didn't really exist before 2020, becoming a $3 billion company in early 2022, just 2 years later, before it was acquired by Getir. Getir, it was pretty marginal, really, before the COVID pandemic. As of March 22, I think it was valued at $11 billion by the capital markets. So this dramatic expansion is being fueled principally by venture capital and private equity money that's flowed into the sector. This has enabled a few different things to happen. First of all, subsidies for consumers and workers. We note that headline wage figures are typically not necessarily high, but a little higher than other bits of the platform economy on the one hand. And consumers who use these apps, if you've used one, you'll know that there are very commonly lots of subsidies available to you. Finally, because it's a boom industry, the map of European Q-commerce is dazzling and kaleidoscopic, and it's changing very quickly. This map is about 18 months old. It's already completely out of date, but it gives you a sense of the breadth of new companies that have emerged onto the scene in the last 3 years and how diverse they are across different national economies too. Something else to say about the industry is that, to put it politely, there's quite a bit of hype involved in the sector. So this is Khan Sumer from the founder of Gorillas, and he predicted about a year back in an interview that Gorillas would reach 100% market penetration of all retail grocery goods. Slightly ambitious, you could say, but he predicts that using technology and algorithmic prediction of what people would want, that they would be able to create, in his words at the bottom, a society that needs nothing, because these firms know what you want before you even know, and they deliver it to you in advance. And he says at the end there that we're 100% sure about one thing. If you can go to the fucking moon, then you shouldn't ever have to go to the supermarket. So there's a real sort of futurist orientation in the industry. This isn't just the kind of hype associated with one person, I should say, but I think it's intimately tied to the business model of Q-commerce, which, as I argued, is heavily reliant on venture capital and private equity money flowing into it. That's because these firms have tried to blitzscale, what some business school academics call blitzscaling their way into prominence in markets. That is, spending as much as you need in order to try to capture a large market share without worrying too much about whether you're making a profit or a loss. It's only with what we call in the report patient venture capital. Venture capitalists who are prepared to subsidize your operations and take a big loss that enables this sort of blitz scaling approach to happen. So we saw in 2021, $18 billion of investment flow into the sector. I think the figure for Europe is about 4.5 billion euros. Last year was a real crunch point for this business model, as the Federal Reserve in the US raised interest rates, at one of its most rapid paces in history, from about 0 to 5% in the space of a year. This patient venture capital has become far less patient than it was, and is demanding now that these firms show investors pathways to profitability. This is a problem for firms because even in the established retail sector, margins are very slim indeed. If you can make 5% returns in the grocery industry, you're doing very well. Typical margins are more like 1 to 3% for a typical supermarket operation. None of really the big Q-commerce players make a profit, and many sustain very big losses. What investors call the burn rates in quick commerce are dramatic. Gorillas, again before its acquisition last year, was estimated to be losing 60 million euros every month. Getir apparently lost $1 billion in the year of 2022 alone. And we see this correlate with quite dramatic layoffs, 300 in Gorillas before the acquisition, 1,000 in Getir, and now Getir just this weekend I think is going through another round of layoffs once again. And these firms are reticent to go back to the private capital markets and ask for more money because they're worried there'll be big markdowns in their valuations if they're forced to do so under these circumstances. It's a compressed story, but what does this mean for the future of these firms and the industry in general? Does it mean that they're just an epiphenomena of 15 years of very low interest rates and patient venture capital, and that they'll disappear now that interest rates are back at whatever we call normal rates? Well, we don't think so. And this is for one crucial reason, that these firms are not entirely analogous to aggregator or asset-light platforms like Uber. Uber, for example, doesn't own any cars. Booking.com doesn't own any hotels. Deliveroo doesn't own any restaurants. Does now actually own a small number. But the typical business model of platforms is not to own your core assets. That's not the case in quick commerce. These firms do, they rent real estate, often on long agreements. They own their bikes, equipment. They have long-run supply relationships with wholesalers. And therefore, even if in the short term many of these firms go bust or merge or are acquired by other firms, it's quite likely that in the long run, lots of these investments in tangible and intangible capital will remain in some form or another. They may be bought up by the big incumbent supermarkets, or they may go down other routes, such as licensing their services to firms which are not currently using a quick commerce model. So although there's a lot of turbulence and the business landscape is changing, as Oliver mentioned at the beginning, at a very rapid pace, we anticipate that what we call the infrastructure of Q-commerce, understood expansively, not just buildings, bikes, and so on, but also the practices of consumers and their habits and their expectations, it's quite likely that this model will have long-lasting implications for the retail sector. So with that, I'll hand over to Rachel, who will look at some of the implications of these business transformations for workers.
Yeah, so to put that business model and quite volatile financial environment to a bit of context, we conducted interviews across 4 different companies in 3 countries, so in the UK, in Spain, and in Germany. And this slide gives an overview of the main kind of roles and typical people that work within the dark store. So there's a kind of delineation between those who work within the warehouse. So when a customer orders via the app on their phone, the pickers within the warehouse are directed via their app to pick and pack the goods. The riders are then told via their app to collect the customer's order and deliver it to the customer, routed by mapping software. And then there's kind of 2 tiers of management, if you like, to sort of oversee operations. So you have the supervisor and the store manager. We found the workers within dark stores and doing both the riding and the warehouse work were mostly men. There were some women working as pickers. A lot of younger people as well, a lot of immigrants and students. And much like we see in the rest of the platform economy, a lot of people who are doing this as a means to kind of top up or supplement their income, alongside those who perhaps through the pandemic had lost their jobs and they were looking at a career change, and this was a means to kind of to earn some money in the interim. This slide gives a bit of a summary of the kind of general terms and conditions that were offered by the workers that we spoke with in the 4 firms that are indicated below. And you can see there that there is a trend of direct employment within each of these firms, and that pay was typically above the minimum pay rates in each of the countries. However, what we did also notice that there was a kind of hybrid. So on the one hand, you have this kind of preferential contractual entitlement, but on the other hand, we're also seeing that some of the statutory entitlements that workers would be entitled to weren't necessarily honoured, and some of those similarities that we come to expect perhaps with the platform economy were very much in evidence. So for instance, in terms of precarity, you know, that this tension between this secure contractual status on the one hand and the reality that workers reported back to us. So we heard from workers who were finding that their work patterns were completely unpredictable. They were finding out about the shifts that they were due to work the following week on the weekend. We saw evidence of use of fixed-term contracts in the German case, and increasing use of zero-hour contracts in the UK case. We also heard from workers about mass layoffs and spurious terminations. So, I mean, as Steve just mentioned, there was reports in the news around another round of layoffs for Getir, with one worker describing this as a redundancy massacre. But I draw your attention to the quote at the top there. One UK rider described his contract as make-believe, a 0 hours contract masquerading as a contract. Rather than fire people, they just don't give them hours, and that's how they manoeuvre around employment law. We also heard about management practices. The top point relates to this idea around the work allocation and algorithmic control. So workers described again this kind of tension between not knowing who was in charge and having this sort of third party out there in the ether kind of controlling and monitoring and timing the work that they do. One worker described to me receiving what he termed an auto dialer from Turkey if he stood in the same spot for 7 minutes or more. But he said, you know, if I go and I'm delivering to a big block of flats, it's impossible not to be still. Yeah, in terms of the inconsistency of management of disciplinary and grievance, again, you know, we heard a lot around the rapid turnover of workers from all staff, but they also said that wasn't just related to the pickers, the warehouse staff and the riders, but it concerned the management as well. And one of the outcomes of that was that, you know, they seemed to be kind of making it up as they went along, that workers were describing that there wasn't a standard approach to disciplinaries and grievances, and that managers quite often just, you know, did what they saw fit, and workers were kind of laid off for spurious reasons. The final point relates to these standard employment protections not being honoured. So we spoke with some workers, for instance, those who were termed perhaps longer term. So they'd been there maybe a year or so, and they were describing it being a challenge booking any holiday entitlement, and that any time they had off, that, you know, that was going to be unpaid. Or equally, that those terms and conditions that we described, so that you know, the pay that they might come to expect, or the bonuses that they'd been recruited off the back of, actually weren't being honoured, and that they weren't receiving them. Again, health and safety, another example, and I draw your attention to the quote at the top left. Health and safety couldn't be further from it how it should be. The fire extinguishers have never been checked. These are the things people go to prison for, and more importantly, people come to harm. There were numerous examples of health and safety issues amongst many of the workers, mainly related to kind of workplace conditions and equipment. So insufficient bike servicing was flagged in all of the country cases, particularly within the German case. Workers described receiving their seasonal gear woefully late. So, you know, the winter had very much kicked in, but they were still kitted out in gear that was much more suited to the summer. Workers also describe this kind of intensification of stress arising from the work, and I think this really speaks to this, the tightening of financial conditions that Steve spoke about. So workers described having to process higher volumes of orders, but also having pressure to deliver more. This photograph was sent to me by one rider, and this kind of demonstrates two of the things I've talked about. So one was the algorithmic control, so that the app has allocated this rider to deliver all of these goods, yet the health and safety implications of this are obvious for all. Where's this rider supposed to put his feet? We also have another example here. I don't think I can press play on this video. Perhaps you're able to do that there. But it's just an example of some of the poor weather conditions that riders were expected to go out and work in. And again, while you have local management on site, they were very slow to react and respond when the weather conditions were particularly hazardous. So, in terms of feeling the squeeze, you have this intense pressure in terms of extra workload, the allocation of work, less staff being scheduled on. And I think this quote from a rider in Germany really sums it up. It started to be all over the news that the company was doing really bad, and they just started to squeeze and squeeze every time I'd work. So, you have, on the one hand, when the kind of Q-commerce burst onto the scene, these crazy discounts, £15 off when you spend £16 or more. But actually that venture capital money has dried up, and the workers are very much feeling the pinch and the impact of that. So we then looked, as I say, at these 3 country case studies, and what was obviously very evident from the business practices that I've described is that there is very much a role for unions to play. However, the extent of union organising was varied across the 3 country case studies. So in Spain, we observed that mainstream unions have had successes in organising workers at both Getir and Glovo, very much building, I think, on existing networks and organising within Glovo's takeaway delivery riders. And they've had some successes in negotiating, for instance, vehicle safety checks, provision of appropriate uniforms and health and safety audits and the like. So we've seen, organising working. Within Germany, the most prominent form of kind of worker opposition, if you like, was through kind of grassroots and just kind of mobilisation of workers kind of forming collectives, if you like. Within Gorillas, workers have successfully organised works councils at both the regional and at the local level. They're very much involved in grievance processes, but there is more to be done. And those involved described the problems of durability and lack of resource. Finally, in the UK, there's been a lack of any official union organising. That said, GMB, one of the main unions, have signed a somewhat controversial agreement with Deliveroo, which will cover their Deliveroo hop riders. So what were our findings? I think we have four key findings from our research. The first relates to that business environment that Steve discussed. So this distinctive business model really marked by this larger investment in both tangibles and intangibles than we see in the rest of the platform economy. Secondly, this trend for direct employment and this kind of financial model of venture capital investment, which ultimately has lost its patience. However, and that's a big but, this direct employment hasn't translated into less precarity. We've seen and we've given a flavour of some of the examples that were shared with us today of poor conditions and non-compliance with statutory entitlements, which led us to ask, will the path to profitability be paved over the back of workers? We've seen how this kind of tightening financial environment has meant that economic pressure is being cascaded down onto workers, which was very much something that they described to us, and that through that intensification of the work that there has been mistreatment of those workers. That said, and to end on a positive note, we have seen that worker organisation can achieve success despite the very real challenges, and I think I'll leave it there. Thank you all.
Thank you. Whoa. Is this... If... Yes, okay. We have a problem if two mics are on, it might give an echo, as you just heard. Thank you, Rachel. Thank you, Steve. I would like to call to the front Emirali, Emirali Karadogan, if I say it correctly, from the Tescope East Union in Turkey. So I'll give you the mic.
Hello, everybody. Generally, we have to work for the weekly day, 45 hours, but self-employed riders in the Getir, about 66 hours. It means they work a lot of time the other workers. Life is, when we compare or we ask, what do you think about life balance, life-work balance? What do you think? They said that life is only about work, because we work for a long time and we didn't or we don't see any our family members. When we go to home, everyone is asleep, and I go to home, go to work, everybody is asleep again. We didn't find or we don't find anybody's or our families. About the wage, almost none of the Getir employers get some wage, because the more you work, the more you earn. Every time somebody works 15 days, somebody works 8 hours, it means if you work more than the other, you can get or earn the other one. Also, wages are not high enough for the effort exerted. Self-employed riders seems to learn more than permanent workers, but it means our statutory wage is minimum wage about at this research time, I think about 320 euros. But the self-employed riders, these couriers, if work a daily about 14 hours, they just above 20% higher than or above the minimum wage. This is, it means they don't earn a lot of money. Employment status, this is the big question about, I think, not just for Turkey, for the, or Europe, for the global. This is, this type of worker is employee or self-employed. In our country, Getir uses a hybrid status. Some workers as an employee, some workers as a self-employed. But self-employed is measure of this Getir's business model. Also, the important one is social protection. Social protection is for the self-employed is not good. Also, we can say they don't have any social protection. If you are a worker of the Getir, yes, you have legal or labor as a labor act, you can covered by the social security. If you are as self-employed workers, you don't have any rights, because as a labor law, you look as a businessman or you're self-employed, you are independent workers. It means you are not covered with the social security. Generally, permanent workers, as a salaried workers, salaried courier or driver, as a paid leave, but you don't leave. You cannot. You have, if you want to leave or day off for a week, one day, it means that you cannot earn anything. You have to spend your time or spare time without the money or get any earnings. About the assignments, same as some algorithms is using for this assignment. You get some task from the telephone or mobile, and you get some brings or your, to delivery this to the commerce. Important thing is technology is used for the monitoring of these workers. This is the more important. With the agent also monitoring these workers, it means if you do something, penalty or something is bad for the Getirs, it means you not work tomorrow. Health and safety is more important for this one. For me, it's the biggest important case in Turkey, because if you have your bike, you have the personal protective equipment. generally, all workers say that Getir deliver all the PP, but they don't suitable. We can give all the jackets at the winter time. It's not covered for the, or protected for the cold, and we use the same this jacket at the summertime also. The source of danger is a lot of things. I think the other country is the same. The danger, physical structure of the roads, poor street light in the night, drunk driving, the behavior of the intoxicated people, vehicles that travel the opposite side, and the public not accepting the motorcycle as a vehicle is the big problem. And dogs that case after the motorcycle generally at the night time. And maybe last thing for the health and safety, and I was wrapping cordboard around my body with duct tape against the wind. Said that the other one helps cause neck pain and wind causes pain in the legs, said another, my respondent. Generally, I say that in conclusion, as I said that there is no good condition in the Getir in Turkey workers. Maybe we can say a lot of things, but the limited time for this one. In conclusion, they want to decent work in Turkey. Thank you.
Thank you, Emirali. I'll put this off. Yes. So we didn't ask any question, but I think you will all get questions also in the panel discussion and maybe from the audience as well. That's the second half of our launch of these two studies. I would like to introduce the panel that will react on the studies and will kickstart the discussion. So we have first and foremost, we have Agnes Jongerius here from the European Parliament, coordinator for the S&D group in Empel, a member of the Employment Committee. Can I ask you to come forward and take a seat maybe here? That's good. We'll just make the round like that. We have Max Uebe, Head of Unit of the Future of Work and Youth Employment in the DG of the European Commission on Employment, Social Affairs and Inclusion. We have Frank van Bennekom, an organizer. So he's a union official for Young and United of the Federation of Dutch Trade Unions, FNV, in the Netherlands. And we have Valerie Pulignano, professor of sociology in the KU Leuven and principal investigator of Fair Work Belgium. And we have Ben Wray on remotely from Catalonia, so researcher and coordinator of the Gig Economy Project and Brave New Europe. So I think we will start here in the room. I would like to give you all the chance to maybe first reflect, so an opening statement, and then we'll try to make it as interactive as possible. We'll pass around the mic. So I have a mic for the panel and a mic for myself, for the audience. So Agnes, can I start with you?
Yes, thank you. And thank you also for bringing these studies to the table, because I think these are very necessary. Because in a way, if you are a modern inhabitant of a modern European city, it seems to be so handy. Just use your mobile telephone, and indeed, in 30 minutes, people are there. I must say, sometimes, as an inhabitant of these modern European cities, I'm also a little bit complaining as an elderly woman biking through Utrecht, when all these young people on these electrical bikes are passing left, right and center, but that's just an annoying remark from an elderly woman. Sorry for that. But it seems to be the future. And I think what I like about this study is that indeed you would tend to think that if we solve the issue of are platform workers self-employed, or do they have an employment contract, which is of course the big fight with the Ubers and the Deliveroo's of this world. If we win this fight, and we need still the European Council of Ministers to move on this, European Parliament is finished for the negotiations, we need the ministers to also take a position. You would have thought that if that's clear, everything is clear. But what I like about your study is that you indeed say it's not the fact that they have a real contract, that precariousness is out. It's still there. And I think the world needs to know about this. Because the world needs to know that some things we all consider as these are there, basic social protection, that in the beginning of the month you know around how much money you earn at the end of the month, so you can plan your life and see if you can pay your bills. It's not there. And I think it's important to be aware of that, to indeed use this as a, let's say, firing up the debate about the platform economy, but also know that we are not finished if we have this issue cleared about their employment status. We should do more, because if this is the model which venture capitalism, private equity can do in this retail sector, they can also do it in the cleaning sector, they can do it in the care sector, in the elderly sector, elderly care sector. So we will lose complete parts of our economy stripped from basic workers' protection. So I would say thank you for the studies, and let's keep talking about the solutions.
Maybe on that, Max, you work in the Commission. Agnes just mentioned also the Platform Work Directive. There's one key discussion about self-employment or labor contracts. Is this on your radar? Is this a new thing, or is it taken care of in the current discussions for you?
Yeah, thanks first of all for the invitation here today. Indeed, I believe I was invited because my unit is in charge of the Platform Work Directive. So we proposed it more than 1 year ago. And maybe also first to thank the researchers, because what we at least try to do in the Commission is policy making based on evidence, and for evidence we need good research. And in particular in this area, we have seen this where we have so fast changing business models, it's even more important to have good data that allow us to justify proposals for, in this case, for a directive. A few words on the directive. I don't want to go into too much detail, but maybe reflecting a few points that were raised here, including the one just mentioned, that is definitely on this, also the core. People describe it as the core of the directive, and that is the employment status. The issue that we have through research seen that in Europe millions of platform or people working on platforms, I should say correctly, are misclassified, meaning that they should have an employment status, but the platform treat them as contractors, as self-employed, etc. So what the Commission proposed in December 2021 is what we call a rebuttable presumption of employment status, meaning that if certain criteria are fulfilled, the person is presumed to be a worker. This can be rebutted, but this is kind of the core provision of the directive, because, and this has been said, the employment status at the European level, but also national level, is basically the gateway to labor and social rights. Of course, I read also with interest that employment status is not the silver bullet. You have shown that even people that are employed suffer from precarious working conditions. But I don't know whether the colleague from Turkey, he said, no, that from your point of view, it is very important in our assessment, indeed, not only for labor rights, but also for social protection. Another element that we cover is, of course, OSH. I will not go into detail, but of course, OSH is very, very relevant in this context. Again, maybe the moment also to refer or to mention the second important chapter of the proposal that is on algorithmic management. the first of its kind at the European level, trying to ensure that algorithms are more transparent, that people have certain rights to review, etc., etc. And I mentioned that because algorithms, as you have said, can have quite an impact also on the health and safety of people. And if I may, a last point that is on workers' organization and social dialogue, because we also tried to help that in a sector or in an area where it is more difficult than in others to organize yourself, because you don't have the factory gate or the canteen where you meet if you are a driver or a rider. So the proposal of the Commission includes a provision that foresees that platforms open communication channels, so that allow people working on the platforms to communicate with each other or with representatives, trade unions, etc. So I think this is an important point in this context. Also, one word, I know my time is over. The Commission...
We're actually good on time, so...
Good on time. No, then let me just add that the Commission also adopted in the area of competition law so-called guidelines that put away with obstacles that solo self-employed could face. Solo self-employed in platform work when they try to organize. All in all, maybe the Commission has been rather active in areas of digitalization, also outside employment. Let me mention the Digital Services Act, the Digital Market Act, the proposal for the AI Act. Of course, our directive for us in DG Employment, for our Commissioner, it is always very important, and a kind of the mantra is that in the digital world, labor, social rights should apply as they apply in the analog world. I think that is important. And we hope that with our proposal also people working in the Q-commerce will benefit soon from better working conditions. Agnes Jongerius just mentioned that the Parliament did its job, so they have the negotiating mandate. We had yesterday a whole day in Council, so Council is still working on that, but I think we are all confident, and the good news may be that I think all member states want now to get to an agreement, a general approach by June, that we then soon can start the trilogues between Parliament, Council and the Commission. Thank you.
So maybe to go from the European level, because there is a clear priority to deal with it on a European level. It's a European issue, as we've seen also the different countries. There's differences, but there's also a lot of similarities. We have somebody here, Frank van Bennekom, from you're from Amsterdam. There are dark stores, and there's also several companies active in Amsterdam in the Q-commerce. Somebody on the ground. Netherlands wasn't part of the study, but maybe you could give a bit of your experience as organizing these riders.
Yeah, sure. I think this doesn't work, but I have a loud voice, so okay, it does work, I hear. So, okay. So I've been an organizer for 10 years, and I've been a union official for 3 years. I work with cleaners, with factory workers, with bakery workers, and I have the pleasure of working with Q-commerce workers. So I heard a lot of interesting topics, and very much of them are very relatable to the Dutch situation. There are some things that are quite different also than the study point, and I will just go into detail about this because I think it's important for everybody to know. The first one that didn't get much attention is the security or the safety of the riders. 1 in 3 riders has a severe accident in the Netherlands. 1 in 3. So that means it's more safe to play Russian roulette than it's to work for those kind of companies. It's insane when you think about it. Also, we have, that was briefly mentioned in England, but in the Netherlands as well, we have, I would call it yellow unions, basically determining collective bargaining agreements and making our life quite difficult to insert new collective bargaining agreements. Maybe the third point also, which is not mentioned here, is that workers in the sector cannot allow themselves to call in sick, because what employers do is the first 2 days that they're sick, they're not getting paid. They're not paying the workers. So yeah, this is, I think, really a danger to a society. And if they can get away with it in this sector, I'm pretty sure they will try it everywhere in the Netherlands as well. and now, while I have the microphone, I think it's also good to say some things we as unions also need to do better. Because when we're pointing to employers to do things better, there are also 3 fingers pointing towards ourselves. We as unions have been not able to resonate well with the young generation, and we really need to realize that it's not the same society as it were 100 years ago. That means that we need to step our communication. A nice example is also that recently I've been told there's this thing called TikTok, and we made a silly, I would also almost call it stupid video, and what do you know? Within a week we got 500,000 views of that little TikTok video, which was about the rights of Q-commerce workers in the sector. So it's insane. We will not get those results basically with an old-fashioned leaflet. Also, on the part of communication, when it's 2/3 or maybe more of the workforce that only speaks English, why are we still sending Dutch leaflets or communications towards the workers? It's insanity. So I think there are a lot of improvements we as unions can also make. And I want to end up a positive note that I've said it before, but I've been working for 13 years within the trade union movement. I have never experienced wind in de zeilen, hoe gaan we dat nou vertalen? This much
momentum.
Yeah, momentum for the youth, for the young youth union, for the young workers inside the union. Every worker I speak to is very interested, loves to get involved, and that has resulted in the Netherlands into more than 200 members within the last 3 months. So we are also currently busy. I don't know if there are people here working for those companies, but we're also planning to do strikes, and we're in the middle of that as well. Just as you know.
So watch out, indeed. Like don't give away too much. So we have the last, not the last, because we will give Ben as well the floor, of course, from Catalonia, but the last physical present, Valeria. So you are from academia, but you're not part of the research. So it's maybe interesting to also hear your take on what we've been doing.
Well, first of all, thank you very much for inviting me, and I would like to congratulate the researchers of this fantastic study. I mean, I found it myself a lot of similarities in what you wrote in the report with what we have been doing since the last years with a group of researchers in the Center for Sociological Research at the KU Leuven, where I work. We have been studying also a lot of this gig work and platform riders and care workers on platforms and freelancing work on platforms. And we found a lot of really similarities. We also do find that employment status is not the, let's say, sufficient and necessary conditions for, kind of improving and creating fair working conditions for workers. Of course, we do know the employment status is an important factor, but doesn't say much or doesn't really, doesn't solve the situation. We do need a lot of, introducing minimum standards, particularly regarding not only wages, but also working hours. Working time is an important factor which sometimes is forgotten, I think, to a certain extent in the regulation of platform work. And I think that this is very, very important to pay attention on. We see a lot of what you just reported about, people working harder in terms of work intensification. Now, this is a strategy which is not new of the platform economy. This is a strategy that firms and companies and multinational whatsoever have been using for ages, okay? This is, an old fashion, let's call it in this way, strategy. And and this is the way in which value is created now from an academic perspective. So we really need to pay attention on this working time regulation. People who, work also have breaks which are not paid. We found a lot of unpaid work through this platform work. In the sense people say, well, what is this unpaid work, unpaid employment? Well, it's about, underpayment, first of all, because the wages that these people get, as you also pointed very rightly, are very little. They don't earn much, and also the colleague from Turkey pointed that out. And platforms, of course, and companies, they take advantage of all these. And secondly, also because they, as I said, make people, working harder and harder and harder. And this is at the core of the business model. Just delivering in 10, 15, 13 minutes whatsoever, but squeezing time for workers with a lot of problems, as you raised, for health and safety issues. A lot of accident. I can talk about Italy. Everybody, just listen to the news about, what happened, not recently, but anyhow, this kind of accident, they happen. And then, these are really, really, very, very dangerous kind of situation created for workers. So, I can keep talking for long. What I would like to point is also another thing. Unpaid labor in terms of, being paid very little, being, working harder, but also not having the possibility, and this is, I don't know to what extent that might be the case, not of riders, but more of freelancers, not having the possibility to fix their own prices and not having return on investment, which normally a normal freelance should have. And these people don't have. So we need also, I think, here, start to think in terms of how do we try to envisage. Of course, we need to reinforce social employment regulations issue, particularly, I would say, on working time, wages, and so forth. We need also to think about the market. How do we arrange, how do we regulate the market? And this is an ongoing conversation, that we perhaps will never end. But, we really need to think that there will not be possibility to regulate the labor market, and trade unions will have hard time if we don't start to regulate also the market in the way how it should be, creating fair competition in the market. This is what people and freelancers in particular, in our case, in our study, they've been pointing to. And I stop here. Sorry.
Yes, so I see Max, you want to react shortly because we have also Ben online.
Make it interactive, but you said in the beginning, employment status is not if I understood you correctly, not the solution. But then you came with two examples: wages and working time, where you would benefit from worker status, at least if you look at the European directives, because you would benefit from the working time directive and the recently adopted minimum wage directive. So how does that fit together? Yeah.
No, what I said is let's say, not necessary and sufficient condition. So it's a necessary condition, of course, because if you have an employment status, you are protected, right? So you are protected. But employment status can also mean fixed term, as also has been, I think, and we found a lot of this evidence also in our study. And fixed term means, you can have a fixed term contract, which is an employment status, but then, you are out. Of course, you have to kind of being reinserted into the circle. But as I said, I don't want to say that is not important. It is an important condition, but it's not solving all the main problems. That's what I want to say, yeah.
No, and I think that's also maybe for the discussion. So after Ben, I will go to the research, because a lot of in the study is about the enforcement of the rights. So the rights are there, but are they enforced? Ben, can you hear us? Have you followed the discussion? Everything works fine?
Yes,
so maybe I'll give you the opportunity to also chip in the discussion.
Sure, and thanks very much for having me. And well done to the authors on the report. I think it's a really substantial piece of work, very comprehensive. I do follow what's produced on this section of the economy, and I think this is probably the most substantial thing that's been produced on Q-commerce, and certainly in Europe. So well done, the report. Let me just make a few points. I'm a journalist, and I've spent some time reporting on the Q-commerce sector. I spent 4 or 5 days in Berlin last year at the Gorillas Works Council, which was a very interesting experience. I learned a lot there about how this works and the dynamics of organising in this space. Let me just pick up on the last sort of little bit of debate there about the Platform Work Directive and this sector. I think the thing is that employment does provide a level of protection in and of itself, and I think it's important to say that. And one of the things that has aided organising in grocery delivery versus restaurant food delivery is the fact that the workers are employed. Why is that? Because in restaurant food delivery, where everyone's self-employed, there's no limit on the labour supply, and it's very, very hard to cohere the labour force and organise them. Whereas where there is a limit on the labour supply, and you can unionise people or get them into, you know, workers' collectives as they've done in Berlin, it's easier to organise. I think that is important to recognise that one of the reasons why you've seen things like in Berlin, where there's been wildcat strikes and a level of organisation that you maybe haven't seen as much in restaurant food delivery, is because that they're employees. It's also because they're based at dark stores. So you can identify the workers, you can meet the workers more than in restaurant food delivery, but employment is part of that. So employment definitely doesn't end precariousness. I mean, we all know that, right? That supermarket workers, call centre workers, workers in retail shops, these are all precarious workers, but they're all employed workers. But what it does do, I think, is it aids organisation for unions, and it provides a base level of protection. So I think we should recognise that. Second point I want to make is about one of the key things the report says, which I agree with, is that in terms of moving forward on sort of regulation in grocery delivery sector, enforcement is probably the key area rather than new legislation. When I was in Berlin, it was very, very clear that what the workers were most facing issues with was wage theft. Either the late payment of wages, not paying all of the wages, not paying them at all. And this wasn't just an issue at Gorillas. I've just published an article last week about Flink, the other German grocery delivery company, and it's a prominent issue there as well. So this is clearly it's illegal not to pay workers the wages they are owed. And, you know, this is, but if you don't have enforcement, if you don't have anywhere where workers can go to say, I haven't been paid my wages in full, what are you going to do about it? Remember, lots of these are migrant workers, lots of them don't speak the language, lots of them are very young, they don't necessarily know their rights, they don't necessarily know how to access their rights. And even if they know how, who do they go to? They have to pay a lawyer, because many of them can't afford to pay a lawyer. So enforcement is, I think, a key issue, and that's one of the things the report said, and I agree with that. Final issue I want to raise is the high turnover in this sector, which I think is one of the biggest challenges in terms of organising. When I was in Berlin, it was very, very clear that I didn't meet any of the key organisers were over 25. They're all under 25. They're all very young. Many of them are doing this alongside being students. They're not necessarily going to stay in this sector a long time. That is why there's a need for, you know, professional unions in this space, because if you're going to build long-term organisation, you need people who perhaps have been involved as a grocery delivery worker and then come out of that, enter into unions or employed by unions, and that aids the organising process. I think the person from Amsterdam, so I forgot his name, makes a good point that unions do have to think creatively about how to reach out to this group of workers. And, you know, he mentioned communication tools. I would mention to think creatively about membership rates and how you can get a core of workers into these unions without forcing them to pay high membership rates because they have very little money. And I also think you have to identify the best organisers and try to recruit them. Some of the people I met that are involved in the Works Council, they're part of a workers' collective, an informal union. These are fantastic organisers. They know how to speak to people who work in this sector because they're, you know, they can relate to them. They're from a similar background, and you can recruit and organise them. So I think unions have to think creatively about how to do that, because the issue of high turnover makes it really, really difficult to organise permanent, sustained organisation over the long term. So I'll just make those 3 points, but well done with the report. I think it's a really important piece of work.
Thank you, Ben. We will come back to you in the discussion, if possible. I would like to bring this back also to the researchers. Will, we haven't heard you, Wil Hunt. Maybe you want to react on the things that were said.
Thank you. Thanks for all the input from the panel. So really interesting discussions and points that everybody's made. So yeah, maybe just to kind of touch.
Maybe you can go.
Oh, okay. Okay, thank you. So yeah, so I'll just come back on some of those points. So yeah, I think I think people picked up on it, but just to kind of reiterate, really. Yes, so actually one of the things we were surprised about is because of the sort of model, we knew that the idea was that in order to be able to schedule people at times when you would be able to respond quickly to orders coming in, then this is why they use the sort of go for the employment contracts model rather than the self-employed model. And so we sort of went in with an open mind, expecting this to mean that they were in a much less precarious position. But as you sort of mentioned, as we've talked about, that wasn't necessarily the case. But just to sort of clarify, I think most of the people, the workers that we spoke to, would much rather be on contracts than in a self-employed situation. So that's just so that for those who are on self-employed contracts, which there are some in some companies in some countries, having a contract is preferable. Like we said, that doesn't necessarily solve all the problems. So, for example, in the UK, there was evidence of 0 hours contracts. That's one area where people obviously would rather not be on a 0 hours contract, would rather have guaranteed hours of some description. In Germany, there were people who were on fixed term contracts, and one of the big issues was that with those was that people were complaining that they weren't having their contracts renewed, either if the managers didn't like them or they were somehow seen as problem workers. They wouldn't have their. There was definitely a concern that the management were using that to just get rid of people they didn't really like, and they were also using the probation rules that they have about. Sort of misusing the rules that they have about probation in Germany, we would argue, just because if people are on probation, they don't have as many warnings before they could just terminate their contracts. And there was reports that managers were pushed just to get rid of people if they thought they were a problem. So so maybe there's something about enforcement that needs to be done there, and maybe also just looking at misuse of regulations or clauses in regulation for purposes that they aren't really meant for. Like you mentioned, Ben mentioned about wage theft. We also we had a lot of reports of wage theft or non-payment of bonuses. I think in all the countries really. People having to go through the Works Council to try and fight for their payments, and in some cases, I think there were a couple of cases where they said people hadn't been paid for 2 months or something like that. So that's not an insubstantial amount of time. Talking about organising. So as Ben mentioned, with many traditional platform workers, there's a real issue about people. There isn't a workplace for people to regularly meet, and that can be a big barrier to organising. In the case of the dark stores, then there are places that people can meet and they can talk. So that is, even though some people are flying in, they're flying out, so there's not a whole lot of time and space to organise in that setup, but people are meeting, seeing each other, they know each other's names. And one of the key things that in the German case was helpful in helping the workers organise was the use of technology, things like WhatsApp groups, that people could coalesce around certain problems, discuss issues, and this could help it sort of catalysed people to kind of coalesce around specific issues that they could then raise and organise around. So there, and the other thing to say about that, maybe I don't know if it's entirely unique for Q-commerce workers, but because of the model and the business model that's operated in the sector, there is potentially scope for workers to withhold their labour, and as we saw with some of the wildcat strikes, if the pickers go on strike, then it's very difficult for business to carry on as normal. So there are some, obviously there are challenges and there's some issues around enforcement, but there is potential for, some sort of rays of light in terms of how workers in the sector can organise, that perhaps other people, don't have some of those benefits. And the final thing was, as was mentioned, some of the grassroots organising and workers' collectives were very good at organising, and they've been very successful, and they've managed to establish a works council. But one of the issues that they face, compared to sort of more traditional trades unions, is in some cases they don't necessarily have the same protections if they strike. So, we saw some examples of mass layoffs, or some examples of mass layoffs have been seen in Germany, for example. So yes, so there's and one of the issues, in the UK we didn't see much organising, and this is maybe a reflection of this sort of situation in the UK. But also, it's worth mentioning that in the UK, there are sort of the government are trying to push through some changes to the rules about unions that make it much, much harder for even those unions that exist to enable them to be able to strike. So sort of workers are kind of under attack in that respect, some of the rights for organising and striking. So, yeah.
Thanks a lot, Will. To spur a bit of debate, because we have some time also for questions from the audience. I don't know if somebody would like to react on the first finding and on the discussion. I don't know if there are any. Oh, there's a problem? Okay. So I have a question there in the back. Could you please also say your name and if you are from an organization, your organization?
Hi everyone, I'm Robert Torlan from Volt. So to bring a short industry point of view as well, we actually talked also with the research team, and I think from our point of view, I think I'd say that it's less of a question but more of a point that not all platforms are like. We, for example, in Finland where we operate and also have these kind of dark stores, we have a collective agreement with the service union that is kind of existing and works well for our use. So I think it's good to highlight the challenges, but I think at the same time I think it's equally important that in a way kind of the positive examples can also be found and highlighted, that in the way to MEP Jongerius' point of there is convenience and these services can be good as long as we ensure that they're provided in a way that takes account the rights of the workers as well. So good job, and I think it's good to highlight. And I think I think from the platform side, at least, we are very happy to kind of have a dialogue and engage in that, what works, what doesn't, and what we need to improve. So I think just a short message from that side. I think it's always good to have, in a way, all the perspectives part of the discussion. Thank you.
So can I ask you a question? Because part of it, so we talked about the union, organizing, but also a bit of the financial side of things, the financial future of these services. What is your vision there? Because that was it was partly connected also with the worries about the squeezing of the workers in the end. How do you see the market evolving? How are you approaching it? If you're saying there's different companies with different approach, what is your approach to this or your vision?
Well, I think we're currently now owned by a stock listed company, so I can't really go into too much detail on what is. Sorry? Okay, perfect. Sorry. So can't really go into commenting economics, but I think the way we work as a company, we have both our own dark stores, Volt Markets, where we kind of operate the system with employed workers. But then we work with whoever are kind of the national grocery chains, for example, that then they have their supermarket workers doing the picking and we provide the delivery service. And I think I think that also shows that like when you have the Carrefours and others of the world kind of seeing that this space, especially when it's kind of more on the grocery side, that I think in the end it comes from the consumers. If the consumers feel that like they want groceries delivered to their homes, I think eventually there will be players that will provide that service. And I think at the moment, I think it's both kind of the established grocery players, but then also newer platforms that do it. So I think like also the study highlighted that in a way, like this will be kind of there to stay. And it's more of a question on like on what terms or like kind of who are the players. But at least from our point of view, I think this is a growing part of the business.
Yes. Of course, because I don't see many other questions from the audience right now. Oh, yeah, so first we go here and I will come back to you. Yeah.
Because I was wondering, like, before coming to the European Parliament, I was in the trade union movement for a very, very long time. And I must say, I grew up in an age where if you put a issue on, for instance, wage theft to a legal, to the judge, then the employer, if he loses his case, is implementing this for the whole company. So this is, in a way, my question is, it seems as if squeezing the workers, because of the way the Q-commerce is being funded, is a necessary part of the business model. And if that's the case, I think answering the question about is this business model sustainable, the answer should be no, because in the end you cannot do this. But you made in your first remark the statement that even although the interest rates are have grown quite quickly, you still think there is a sustainable business model. Is there a sustainable business model thinkable without squeezing workers from their workers' right? Yes, please.
Sorry, I was sending some final preparation to the end, so in the team. So maybe Steve, you can definitely reply if it works. The mic. Yes, it works.
I think that works. Yeah, just very briefly. I don't know. It's not my problem to resolve. Thankfully, I'm not in the industry, but I suspect that there is the possibility for making some sort of model along these lines successful. I suspect it would involve dropping certainly the 10-minute time commitment. I think if you're trying to do things that quickly, then it becomes almost impossible to generate a profit, even if you squeeze workers very, very hard. I think if things are moving in the direction of incorporating broader services, so not only your own products in dark stores, but also involving other neighborhood stores with much longer time commitments, more like 2 hours or something like that, then I can see, the possibility that there could be a margin, probably a small margin, but a margin to be made in this industry in a way that isn't necessarily quite so destructive to workers' interests and rights as the way things are at the moment. I would say that I think you were quite right to point to the role of venture capital financing in this, because to attract venture capital financing and private equity, you have to make these outlandish claims and you have to promise the earth. And I think that's what got the industry to where it is now. It's why it expanded from 0 to 100 in just 2 or 3 years. But on the other hand, it's now that private equity demanding a return on its capital that's leading to these unbearable pressures being funneled down onto workers. So I think something like this probably will last into the future. I think it will probably look quite different to the way it looks now. But I think, I think venture capital has a lot to answer for in this story. It's not just the technology alone. And I think, in the future, we should be looking quite a bit more at the relationship between new technologies and financing models.
So I walk to the back to the audience. Somebody has a question, but I see a raised hand from Ben, and also Frank wants to react, and also yeah, Valeria. So Ben, can we start with you, and then I will definitely go also to the audience. So Miss, you have to wait a little bit. Ben.
Just following on from what Steve just said, one of the things that I thought about the report was you've got this big section at the start about the business model, and in the second half of the report's about labour rights. The proposals are only about the labour part of it. You don't have a set of proposals about you know, how the business model aspect should change. And I think what Steve's just said is right about venture capital in this space. It's a hugely destructive aspect of the economy that you have all this money flood in, and then it all gets pulled out again. And Gorillas is an example of how, for workers, many workers have moved cities to commit to Gorillas, thinking they're going to have a job, and then suddenly the money's gone and they're unemployed. Shouldn't we have proposals, policy proposals about how to reform capital markets in Europe so that this sort of destructive trends around venture capital money flooding in and flooding out again can't happen?
What is there to be afraid of? So in the end, they finally managed to get to the table and said, like, okay, we want to talk with the union about the future and the things that are wrong in the sector. But there's one condition. It cannot cost any money. So we will talk with your unions, but we're not going to pay a cent extra to the workers. And this is our condition to go to the table. So that basically sums it up, the whole discussion for me.
Yeah, I just wanted also to add a point about the sustainability. I'm also quite skeptical, as Agnes is, that this model will or can become a sustainable model as long as this model is like it is. In a sense that, in fact, you know, moving from production, investment in production to investment in finance and having everything up there makes things impossible. I think that, you know, in order to have sustainability, firms and companies should start to, you know, do as in the old way. I don't want to sound too much old-fashioned, but we need to really rethink about the human capital, not in an economic way, but more kind of social way. So investing in humans, in human capital. And as long as this investment in human capital is not there and is somewhere else, I think that, you know, this will make these models really not sustainable in the future, because we will be always working harder, longer. And, you know, this is not sustainable for society. This is absolutely not sustainable. And it's not sustainable also because precarity is not only in workplaces, but precarity is becoming also an issue in families, in the sense that what normally should be, and here I want to introduce another actor, which to me is very important, is the role of the state and the government. I mean, as long as we will see that the welfare is shifting from state into something else, can be the family, can be the household, the resources are provided in, you know, what we have in private life, that doesn't work. It doesn't work in that way. And we see, in fact, in this model, I read it carefully, the report, and I liked very much also your you know, statement about, you know, no paying unemployment benefits, but, you know, having these people working. So, you know, these forms of work are becoming the new active labor market policies. That cannot be, right? So there should be a kind of rethinking in terms of re-embeddedness, in the sense, without making it too much, you know, complex. Yeah.
So I'm here in the audience. Miss, you had a question.
Yeah, sure. Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Sue Bird. I used to work for the European Commission till about a year ago, and I now work independently. And I just wanted to draw attention to what Max was saying about the platform proposal, and ask whether you think what we've been talking about today actually is covered at the moment, legitimately covered, sufficiently covered by the proposal that we heard about from Max, or whether more is needed, and if more is needed, is it needed in terms of asking companies to do something further voluntarily? Is that possible? Can we draw up a voluntary agreement, a voluntary framework, or is there further legislation needed? I'd be interested in people's perception on that, and that relates to your comment previously as well about the role of the state.
So, Max, this is your
difficult
question.
And you will appreciate that this is not, as they say, for my level to decide if more legislation is needed. But looking now to a member of the European Parliament, the Parliament, at least in an earlier version of the report, has called, to give you one example, for extending the algorithm management chapter to all workers, not only to platform workers. But you also know that we are coming now to the end of a cycle, a mandate. So I would predict nothing much to happen now until this mandate is over. And your first, if they are covered, I don't know if you mean now in terms of scope, of personal scope. I mean, you would need to look into the definitions in Article 2, but and we usually also follow the policy, that we don't make kind of assessments of the situation in individual companies. It's always a bit risky without knowing all the details, but you could probably argue, that here a level of organization of work is there that would allow the Q-commerce rider to be covered by the provisions of the directive as it stands at the moment. Maybe one more comment I thought about earlier when you said, also trade unions have to do their job, and there's many here in the room that have links with trade unions. What we believe is really also important, again, making the link to the proposed directive, that you build up expertise when it comes to how algorithms function. Because we can have the most beautiful provisions on transparency, and that platforms will be obliged to make them transparent. But if there's nobody around that understands and can deal with them, it is not much helped.
Maybe that's also a moment for us to plug a bit like the future work of FEPS, because we are starting actually this month with a program, 2-year program, looking at the AI in the workplace with the Nordic trade unions. So really go in depth, the 2-year research to really answer those questions, because it's not easy. And we see now this is a very much example of a new sector or an old sector where there's new practices, but this will come also to more workers, and it will become a central issue, I think, for the next decade. Agnes, you want to react?
Just a small remark from my side. Does the platform directive solve these issues of this report? I would be ever so happy if indeed Council will be ready with a general approach in June, so we can finish the negotiations on this directive in this mandate, and that will be quite a challenge, I must say, but a much needed challenge, because if we don't stop this loophole, much more water is going to being poured through this loophole. So I think we need this reclassification scandal to be stopped, and we need to stop it via this directive. And like Max already said, in this position of the Parliament, we say the provisions around algorithmic management should not only apply to the classical platform workers, but to all the employers who are using this management. So that's step 2. Yes, indeed. Then there is also the fight, which is a quite basic fight, for stopping the whole 0 hours contract, for having people being prepared all of the time to start working without being paid, which is the case much broader in this sector. And there, I think there is this mix of, yes, we need strong trade union involvement in organizing. We need advocating what's happening in this sector, because if the general audience think that everything can be done for free, because that's basically the assumption. Just sit behind your laptop or your mobile phone, and then it will be for free. Then for free there is always someone paying the price. So I think if we want state intervention, if we want to have indeed an active government to address this issue, we also need a broader awareness of the broader public that for free is someone else is paying the price, and it's not you, but it's the worker.
So I see, Max, you have to go. You're allowed because the official time is over, but I got some reaction. So if you don't mind, we're gonna finish the discussion. Thank you for being here. Oliver, you wanted to react. We're gonna wrap up. So Oliver and Rachel would want to react, and then we're gonna wrap up.
Thanks. Just a couple of comments. First of all, on the platform directive, I think one of the points, the first chapter on the rebuttal of an employment relationship is actually about self-employed workers and bogus self-employed. And that, for me, should also not apply only to platform workers, but to everyone. The second point is, as said, algorithmic management concerns everyone. So that also has to be broadened. We don't want to have a situation where we have one regime for platform workers and another one for everyone else. That's two. The third one is really having rules doesn't work. I mean, precarious working conditions are prevalent and becoming ever more so. We have in the retail sector, we have the platforms coming in. Now here in Belgium, we hear about franchising. So the big companies split up into very small ones without work council, without really a big group of people you can organize. And fourth, of course, with all those regulations, that is all very fine. But we are trade unions, we are social partners, and obviously we want to regulate the key points for the company, for a sector, by collective agreement, because there we are much closer on the real problem than a legislator, especially at European level, can do. So there's a lot to do, but it's not easy. And what we need when we look at Agnes and also at the Commission, we need empowerment from you. I mean, we don't want to regulate what we need to do, but rather empowerment that we as social partners, trade unions, together with employers, can solve it. And that was my point also to the colleagues on the other side, to the platforms. Let's talk. Let's find solutions which fit all of us. Thank you.
So, Rachel, you wanted to react as well. I will give you the floor as the last, before we go to Laszlo, who will join us online.
Yeah, thank you. Just wanted to flag up one of the comments from one of my interviewees, and he actually had a number of different jobs, and he was intending on leaving the work that he was doing as a rider for the Q-commerce firm, because in his words he said, "My other boss is better." Yet his other boss, he was describing his other job, one of which was working for Uber, and he said, because in that job I'm able to provide proper equipment for myself. I can manage this properly, and I think that really speaks to the kind of depth of the problem around, yes, employment contracts, would be a great advantage for many people, but that issue around enforcement is really, really significant. But interestingly, in another one of his jobs, he was also a union member. So, again, he kind of talked about how unions maybe need to think about how they kind of reimagine perhaps their own membership systems, thinking beyond kind of the typical branch structures, and that you have to operate in one workplace, and recognizing now that actually people are very transient. They do move along, and they may have a number of different roles, and maybe your union needs to operate beyond the kind of the fixed location of one workplace, so you're taking it with you, and you just kind of imagine that space and that support in a very different way, because unions have thought very much inside the box for a long time, and maybe this is a spur to really, really kind of imagine something very different.
Thank you, Rachel, for the final thoughts. I would like to go to online. We have Laszlo Andor, the Secretary General of FEPS.
Thanking Oliver and Unia Europa for reminding our audience that this work started years before. In fact, years before I became Secretary General of FEPS, with a cross-country study of platform work, recognizing the transformation of the world of labor again, and this has been a kind of long learning process, not simply to understand what is happening in workplaces due to technological transformation, but also to see what EU regulation needs to do. And let's be honest, why sometimes EU regulation is behind the curve. And we follow the events instead of anticipating faster. what kind of challenges, risks, new technology and other types of changes might bring. For me personally, this specific project was a way to understand what exactly is the meaning of the dark store. And maybe by today I also can see what is the meaning of Q-commerce. And I think it's not far from the reality if we say that we experience basically Taylorism through different means, different technologies, through applications and algorithms. But essentially, it's about managing the time of the worker and managing the way to take advantage of working people by a business organization which is not necessarily controlled either by stakeholders or by the wider regulatory environment. And I think the conclusion we need to draw today is that the risk we are facing is the rise of a kind of pop-up economy, which can potentially eliminate some of the most important achievements of labor struggles and regulations of long decades. On the one hand, the security of the employment; on the other hand, the security of the income. If you pick up in the foyer, the book I published recently about Europe's social integration, this also has a chapter on digitalization, which tries to clarify that the main risk which we have been facing is not so much the impact of technology on the quantity of jobs, but more on the quality of jobs. And speakers today highlighted some of these risks, whether the worker gets the wage which is due, whether health and safety legislation can be enforced in a new form of employment, whether work-life balance becomes a kind of luxury instead of a standard requirement for people working in this new rising sector. And eventually, what I would say is that it's a third generation of the precariat, which is developing as a result of the risks that have been discussed. The first one probably was what was called more than 30 years ago, the McDonaldization of labor already in the 1980s. But then because of several waves of liberalization, you had a second generation affected by the zero-hour contracts, which is not a new story, but probably has been amplified by the period of austerity a decade ago. And now, because of the pandemic and the resulting transformation of labor markets, now we have a third generation, and the so-called key workers have been receiving a lot of attention, but without the capacity to really rein in the developments of business organization. Somehow there seems to be a usual pattern, which is the innovation coming without risk mitigation from the United States, Europe trying to reconcile new forms of business and employment with the social achievements and the social rights which we have established before. And there are some other countries, like Turkey was used as a case study, where probably the European standards are much more difficult to apply. And with this, I don't want to overestimate the enforcement capacity inside the European Union, because we heard about the really concerning stories from EU countries as well. So it was really great to hear from Agnes as well as Max from different sides of the EU institutional triangle, where the policy making and the thinking is developing nowadays. We will continue to follow up, and especially what concerns artificial intelligence. we have been developing a major digital program. So for Gerard, to whom I'm grateful for chairing and moderating the discussion and masterminding the debate today, this has just been the baptism of fire, because the next major chapter is coming with the digital program which we have built with Nordic partners, think tanks from Northern Europe. And we would like to count on the experts that contributed today, but also colleagues from EU institutions to stay with us in the future in discussions about this subject, because the problem is not going to solve itself without a robust policy coordination, legislation, and its own and its enforcement. Obviously, there is also FEPS beyond the digital policy. In the coming period, if you are interested, there will be many other interesting events. We are going to host, for example, on the 13th of April, what we call a next left lecture about the state and future of social democracy. Might be interesting. Or if you are interested on climate change, on the 11th of May, we are hosting an interesting one on climate change mitigation and digitalization. But you find all this on the FEPS website or in the newsletter. Please subscribe. This is the place of the promotion. And before you go home, you can also pick up further publications like the Progressive Post. I'm grateful for everyone who came in person or online. And I wish you a good discussion also in the future on all these matters. Thanks again for the attention.
Thank you, Laszlo. Thank you also to the speakers and experts. We have a small reception, nothing big, but a drink will be served here in the lobby. Thank you all for coming.